Sarah Chen walked through the crowded hallways of Galactic University like a ghost. Students from dozens of species filled the corridors, their voices creating a symphony of different languages and sounds. Tall Zephyrian nobles with their crystalline skin caught the light as they moved. Groups of furry Kethrin students chattered excitedly about their engineering projects. The massive Gorlak exchange students stomped past, their heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. And there was Sarah, barely 5 feet tall, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the same faded jeans and university sweatshirt she wore most days. She might as well have been invisible. "Watch where you're going, Tiny," growled a Gorlak student as he nearly knocked her over. He didn't even look back as Sarah stumbled against the wall. She picked up her dropped books and continued walking. This was normal. This was her life at the most prestigious university in the galaxy. Humans were new to the galactic community, only having made contact 15 years ago. Most species saw them as weak, unremarkable little creatures who had somehow managed to build spaceships. Sarah made it to her advanced xenobiology class and slipped into her usual seat in the back corner. The professor, Dr. Veldtar, was a Zephyrian with skin that sparkled like diamonds. He began his lecture about the cellular structures of silicon-based life forms. "Now, can anyone tell me why carbon-based life forms like humans are considered inferior for space exploration?" Dr. Veldtar asked the class. Several hands shot up. A Kethrin student with orange fur was called upon. "Because they're fragile, Professor. They need oxygen, specific temperatures, and they break easily. They're not built for the harsh realities of space." "Excellent, Furix. And what about their psychological makeup?" A Zephyrian student answered this time. "They're emotional and unpredictable. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. This makes them unsuitable for serious space operations." Sarah kept her head down, taking notes. She'd heard this all before. Humans were the galaxy's newest and weakest members. They were only allowed into the Galactic Federation because they'd developed faster-than-light travel on their own, which impressed some of the older species enough to grant them basic membership. After class, Sarah walked to the library. It was her sanctuary, a quiet place where she could study without being bothered. She found her usual table in the back and opened her quantum physics textbook. "Excuse me," said a voice above her. Sarah looked up to see Zixara, one of the most popular students on campus. She was a Vellani with beautiful blue skin and elegant tentacle-like appendages that moved gracefully as she spoke. Behind her stood her usual group of friends from various species. "You're the human from our xenobiology class, right?" Zixara asked, though her tone wasn't exactly friendly. "Yes, I'm Sarah," she replied quietly. "We're working on our group project about primitive species adaptation, and we need to interview someone from a newly discovered species. You know, to show how the lesser-developed races are adapting to galactic civilization." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, but I'm really busy with my own studies." Zixara's friends snickered. "Come on, it won't take long. We just need you to talk about how difficult it must be for your kind to keep up with more advanced species." I said no. "Thank you." The Vellani student's expression hardened. "Look, little human, this is an honor. Species like yours should be grateful when superior beings show interest in studying you." Sarah closed her book and gathered her things. "I have to go." As she stood to leave, one of Zixara's friends, a tall draconi with scales that shifted colors, stepped in front of her. "Where are you going? We weren't finished talking." "Please let me pass," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "Make us," the draconi challenged, his scales turning a threatening shade of red. Sarah looked around the library. Other students were watching now, but none moved to help. Some even seemed amused by the confrontation. This was entertainment for them, watching the weak little human get picked on. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah said. "Too bad," Zixara smiled cruelly. Maybe this will teach you some humility. Your species needs to learn its place in the galactic order. The Dracony reached out to grab Sarah's arm. In that instant, something shifted in Sarah's posture. Her weight distributed slightly, her stance widened almost imperceptibly. The movement was so subtle that most observers didn't notice it, but there was suddenly something very different about the small human girl. The Dracony's hand never reached her arm. Sarah moved like lightning. Her hand shot up, catching the Dracony's wrist in a grip that made him gasp in pain. With a fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, she twisted his arm and used his own momentum to send the much larger alien sprawling across a nearby table. The library fell completely silent. Zixara and her friends stared in shock. The Dracony, who was easily twice Sarah's size and from a warrior species known for their combat prowess, was groaning on the floor, clutching his wrist. "How did you—" Zixara began, but Sarah was already walking away. As Sarah reached the library exit, she heard whispers starting behind her. She quickened her pace, her heart racing. She'd made a mistake, a big one. The next day, word had spread. The story grew with each telling. Some said the human had thrown the Dracony across the entire library. Others claimed she'd used some kind of human technology or primitive magic. By the time Sarah arrived for her morning class, she could feel every eye in the hallway tracking her movement. She tried to ignore the stares and whispers, but it was impossible. In her galactic history class, Professor Thanedock, an elderly Gorlak, cleared his throat after taking attendance. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice carrying across the lecture hall. "Perhaps you could enlighten the class about human conflict resolution techniques?" Sarah's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Professor." "Well, from what I hear, you demonstrated some quite effective methods yesterday. I'm curious about the cultural context." The entire class was staring at her now. Sarah felt her face burning. "I'd prefer not to discuss it, sir." Professor Thanedock's expression hardened. "I wasn't asking your preference, Miss Chen. I was asking for an educational explanation of human behavior for the benefit of your classmates." Sarah remained silent. She couldn't explain what had happened without revealing things she'd spent 3 years hiding. "Very well," the professor continued. "Perhaps instead you can tell us about Earth's military history. I understand humans have quite a violent past." "Most species have had conflicts in their history," Sarah replied carefully. "True, but most species evolved beyond such primitive behavior before achieving spaceflight. Humans, it seems, brought their violent tendencies with them to the stars." Several students chuckled. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her desk. "In fact," Professor Thanedock continued, "I believe Earth had something called world wars within the last century of achieving galactic contact, massive conflicts that consumed entire continents. How do you explain such barbarism?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Those wars ended over a century ago. Humanity has been at peace since joining the galactic community. Peace through weakness, perhaps. When you're the smallest fish in the pond, you tend to keep quiet." More laughter from the class. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd worked so hard to blend in, to be invisible, to avoid exactly this kind of attention. "However," Professor Thanedock said, his tone becoming more serious, "yesterday's incident suggests that perhaps human peaceful nature is merely a facade. That underneath, you're still the same violent primitives who destroyed your own planet's ecosystem and waged war on each other for millennia." Sarah stood up slowly. The classroom fell silent. "Is there something you'd like to share, Miss Chen?" the professor asked. "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady. I'd like to point out that while humans did have conflicts in our past, we never developed weapons that could crack a planet in half. We never enslaved entire species for 3,000 years. We never committed genocide against 14 different worlds because they refused to trade their children as entertainment. The professor's eyes widened. These were references to specific dark periods in Gorlak history that most younger students didn't know about. Sarah continued, "Every species in this room has blood in their past. The difference is that humans learned from our mistakes. We grew beyond them. We developed empathy, cooperation, and the wisdom to choose peace not from weakness, but from strength." Strength? Professor Thaindock laughed. What would a human know about strength? Sarah picked up her bag and walked toward the door. As she reached it, she turned back to face the class. "More than you might think, Professor. More than you might think." After Sarah left, the classroom remained unusually quiet. Something about the small human's words had carried a weight that made everyone uncomfortable. That afternoon, Sarah was in her dormitory room when her door chimed. She opened it to find two Galactic University security guards, both tall Zephyrians in official uniforms. "Sarah Chen?" one of them asked. "Yes? You need to come with us. There's been a complaint filed against you for assault." Sarah's heart sank. She'd been expecting this. "I understand." They escorted her through the campus to the administration building. Other students stopped to stare as they passed. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the quiet human girl had been arrested. In the administration office, Sarah sat across from Dean Varthul, an imposing Kethran with silver fur and sharp claws that he tapped rhythmically on his desk. Beside him sat Zixara and the Draconi student from the library, whose name Sarah learned was Krelthos. "Miss Chen," Dean Varthul began, "you've been accused of assaulting a fellow student. This is a very serious matter." "I defended myself when he tried to grab me," Sarah said simply. "Krelthos claims you used excessive force. He sustained injuries to his wrist and shoulder." Sarah looked at the Dracony student. His wrist was wrapped, and he held his arm gingerly. To most observers, it would look like evidence of a brutal attack. Sarah knew better. She'd been extremely careful to only use enough force to stop him without causing permanent damage. "I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself," she said. Zixara leaned forward. "Minimum force? You threw him across the library like he weighed nothing." "He lost his balance when I deflected his grab," Sarah replied calmly. Dean Varthul studied the reports in front of him. "Miss Chen, according to witness statements, you displayed combat abilities far beyond what anyone would expect from a human." This raises serious questions. Questions about what? About whether you've been honest in your application to this university? About whether you've concealed military training or enhancement procedures? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of for 3 years. "I haven't lied about anything," she said. "Then explain how you, a supposedly typical human civilian, was able to overpower a Draconi warrior." Sarah remained silent. She couldn't explain without revealing everything she'd worked so hard to hide. Dean Varthul leaned back in his chair. "Miss Chen, I'm going to be direct with you. Humans are new to the galactic community, and there's still a great deal we don't know about your species. Some of my colleagues have expressed concerns about human unpredictability and potential for violence." "I've never been violent toward anyone," Sarah protested, "until yesterday. That wasn't violence. That was self-defense." "Perhaps. But it's raised questions that need answers." The dean opened a file on his desk. "I'm ordering a full background investigation into your history, Miss Chen. If there's anything you've hidden from us, anything that might pose a threat to the safety of this institution or its students, we will find it." Sarah's blood ran cold. A full background investigation would uncover everything. Her carefully constructed new identity would crumble. "In the meantime," Dean Varthul continued. "You're suspended from classes pending the results of this investigation." "For how long?" "That depends on what we find." As Sarah left the administration building, she realized her carefully maintained invisibility was over. For 3 years, she'd managed to blend in, to be just another unremarkable human student studying at a prestigious galactic university. But now they were going to dig into her past. They were going to discover who she really was. They were going to learn about the war. That evening, Sarah sat in her small dormitory room, staring out the window at the campus below. Students moved between buildings, their various forms creating an alien landscape under the light of 2 moons. For 3 years, this had been her world. Tomorrow, it might all be over. She opened her personal communicator and scrolled through the contacts list until she found the one she'd hoped never to use. Colonel Marcus Webb, Earth Defense Force, the last person from her old life who knew where she was. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made contact, there would be no going back. Her peaceful anonymity would be shattered forever. But as she thought about the investigation that would begin tomorrow, she realized she might not have a choice. They would dig until they found the truth. And the truth was something the galaxy wasn't ready for. Sarah closed the communicator without making the call. Not yet. Maybe there was still a way to keep her secrets buried. But as she drifted off to sleep, she knew deep down that her time as an invisible student was over. Soon, everyone would know exactly who Sarah Chen really was. And when they did, everything would change. The investigation began at dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of her door chiming insistently. Through the small window, she could see 3 official vehicles parked outside her dormitory building. Her stomach twisted as she recognized the markings, Galactic Federation Security. She opened the door to find Agent Crixtal, a tall Villani with the cold, calculating eyes of a professional investigator. Behind him stood 2 security officers and a small floating device that Sarah recognized as a truth scanner. "Sarah Chen," Agent Crixtal said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to compliance. "I am Agent Crixtal of Galactic Security. You will accompany us for questioning." "Am I under arrest?" Sarah asked, though she was already reaching for her jacket. "Not yet, but that could change depending on what we discover today." They escorted her through the campus in silence. Students pressed against windows and gathered in groups to watch the procession. Sarah kept her eyes forward, ignoring the whispers and pointing. By the time they reached the administration building, word had spread across the entire university. The questioning room was sterile and cold, designed to make subjects uncomfortable. Sarah sat across from Agent Crixtal, while the truth scanner hummed quietly between them. The device would detect lies, but it couldn't force someone to speak. "Let's start simple," Agent Crixtal said, consulting his datapad. "State your full name." "Sarah Elizabeth Chen." "Age?" 22. "Place of birth?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "Earth, North American sector." The truth scanner remained green, technically accurate, though far from complete. "Education prior to Galactic University?" "I completed standard Earth education requirements." Still green. Again, technically true. Agent Crixtal leaned forward. "Miss Chen, yesterday you demonstrated combat abilities that are highly unusual for a civilian human. Where did you learn these skills?" "I learned self-defense growing up. Earth can be dangerous in some areas." The scanner flickered yellow. Partial truth. "Elaborate on this training." "I took classes. Martial arts. Basic defensive techniques." Yellow again. "Miss Chen." Agent Crixtal's voice hardened. "I'm going to be direct. Our preliminary investigation has revealed some interesting facts about Earth's recent history." specifically about a conflict that ended just 5 years ago. Sarah's heart stopped, but she kept her expression neutral. A conflict, the agent continued, that Earth's government has been remarkably quiet about. A war that apparently involved hostile alien contact before humanity joined the galactic community. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said. Red. Complete lie. Agent Crixtall smiled coldly. The scanner suggests otherwise. Miss Chen, we know that Earth was attacked by an unknown alien force 3 years before first contact with the Federation. We know that this invasion was repelled. What we don't know is how a species that we consider technologically and militarily inferior managed to defeat an advanced alien military force. Sarah remained silent. We've been investigating human military capabilities since you joined the Federation, Agent Crixtall continued. Your weapons technology is primitive. Your space fleet is small and lightly armed. Your population has no significant military training. Yet somehow you defeated an invasion force that had conquered 12 other worlds. The agent leaned back in his chair. So I'll ask again, Miss Chen. Where did you learn combat skills advanced enough to overpower a Draconi warrior? Sarah stared at the table. She could feel the walls of her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. I want to speak to a human representative, she said finally. I'm afraid that won't be possible. This is a Federation security matter now. Then I want to contact Earth directly. Miss Chen, you're not under arrest. Yet. But if you continue to obstruct this investigation, that could change very quickly. The questioning continued for hours. Agent Crixtall probed every aspect of Sarah's background, her education, her family, her reasons for coming to Galactic University. Sarah answered what she could truthfully and remained silent when she couldn't. Finally, Agent Crixtall stood. Miss Chen, you will remain on campus while we complete our investigation. You are not to leave the planet or contact anyone without authorization. How long will this take? As long as necessary. After they released her, Sarah walked across campus in a daze. News of her interrogation had spread, and she could feel eyes tracking her movement from every direction. Whispers followed in her wake. In her advanced physics class, Professor Yildena, an elderly Zephyrian known for her brilliant mind and sharp tongue, addressed the elephant in the room directly. I understand we have a celebrity among us today, she said, her crystalline features reflecting the classroom lights as she looked directly at Sarah. The class turned to stare. Sarah kept her eyes on her notebook. Perhaps, Miss Chen, you could explain to the class how someone with your background managed to defeat a trained Draconi warrior? Sarah remained silent. No? Well then, perhaps you could explain why Galactic Security is suddenly so interested in human military capabilities? Still silence. Professor Yildena walked closer to Sarah's desk. You know, Miss Chen, I've been studying various species for over 200 years. I've learned to recognize certain traits, certain training patterns, certain ways of moving and thinking. Sarah finally looked up. And what I see when I look at you, the professor continued, is not a civilian student. What I see is a soldier. The classroom was dead silent. Every student hung on every word. A soldier from a species that claims to be peaceful. A soldier from a planet that insists it has no significant military capabilities. A soldier who is sitting in my classroom pretending to be something she is not. Sarah stood slowly. Professor, with respect, you don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Tell me, Miss Chen, what was the Vorthan invasion? The blood drained from Sarah's face. The Vorthan invasion was classified information. The galactic community wasn't supposed to know that name. I don't know what that is, Sarah said, but her voice wavered. Professor Yildena smiled grimly. The scanner isn't here, Miss Chen, but we both know that's a lie. Sarah grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "Running away, Miss Chen? How very civilian of you." Sarah stopped at the door. Every instinct told her to leave, to avoid confrontation. But something in the professor's tone, something in the way the other students were looking at her with a mixture of fear and contempt, broke something inside her. She turned around. "You want to know what the Vorthan invasion was?" Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent classroom. "It was genocide?" Professor Yildena's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Sarah continued. "It was 3 billion people murdered in the first 6 hours. It was cities turned to glass. It was children vaporized while they slept. It was the near extinction of the human race." The classroom was so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system seemed loud. "And you want to know how we stopped them?" Sarah's voice was steady now, cold. "We learned to fight. We learned to fight in ways that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams." Professor Yildena took a step back. "We learned to take ships apart with our bare hands. We learned to survive in vacuum for minutes at a time. We learned to kill enemies 3 times our size with nothing but sharp metal and determination." Sarah looked around the classroom at the frightened faces staring at her. "We learned to be monsters so that our children could live to be civilized." She turned and walked out, leaving behind a classroom full of stunned aliens who were suddenly seeing humans in a very different light. That evening, Sarah's communicator chimed with an emergency message. It was from Colonel Webb. "Sarah, they know. Federation security has been asking questions about Operation Nightfall. They know about the Vorthan invasion, and they're connecting dots. You need to get off that planet. Now." Sarah closed the message and looked out her window. 3 security vehicles were parked outside her dormitory. Too late. The next morning, Dean Varthul called an emergency assembly. Every student and faculty member on campus was required to attend. Sarah sat in the back of the massive auditorium, acutely aware that she was the reason for the gathering. Dean Varthul took the stage, his silver fur gleaming under the lights. "Students and faculty, we are gathered today to address a serious situation that has come to light regarding one of our students." Sarah's stomach twisted. "It has come to our attention that Earth, contrary to their claims of peaceful intentions, has a hidden military history. Specifically, they were involved in a conflict that they concealed from the galactic community during the admission process." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Sarah could feel thousands of eyes trying to locate her in the crowd. "Furthermore," Dean Varthul continued, "it appears that some humans currently among us may have military training that was not disclosed during their applications." The murmurs grew louder. "I want to make clear that this university will not tolerate deception or the presence of potential threats among our student body." Sarah stood up. The auditorium fell silent as every head turned toward her. "If you have something to say about me," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the space, "then say it directly." Dean Varthul's eyes fixed on her. "Miss Chen, you are out of order." "No," Sarah replied, beginning to walk down the aisle toward the stage. "What's out of order is condemning an entire species based on fear and prejudice." Security guards moved to intercept her, but she ignored them, continuing to walk forward. "You want to talk about hidden military history?" Sarah's voice grew stronger as she approached the stage. "Let's talk about the Kithran Empire's conquest of the Rimworld colonies. Let's discuss the Zephyrian slave trade that lasted 800 years. Let's examine the Gorlak genocide of the Polari people." The auditorium erupted in angry voices, but Sarah continued. "Every species in this room has blood on their hands. The difference is that humans chose to bury our weapons and join the galactic community in peace." She reached the front of the auditorium and turned to face the crowd. "But if you want to dig up our past, if you want to judge us by our darkest moments, then let me tell you what you'll find." The auditorium fell silent again. "You'll find a species that faced extinction and refused to die quietly. You'll find people who learn to fight impossible odds because the alternative was watching everything they loved turn to ash. Sarah's voice carried across the massive space with perfect clarity. You'll find soldiers who sacrificed everything so that their children could live in a universe where species like yours would accept them as equals. She paused, looking around the audience. And you'll find that the quiet little human in the back of your classroom, the one you barely noticed, the one you dismissed as weak and insignificant, might just be the most dangerous person in the room. The silence was deafening. But here's the thing you need to understand, Sarah continued. We chose not to be that anymore. We chose peace. We chose to be the invisible student in the back row rather than the conqueror at the front of the class. Dean Varthul found his voice. Miss Chen, you are confirming our worst fears about human deception and potential for violence. Sarah looked up at him. No, Dean Varthul. I'm giving you the truth you demanded. The question now is what you plan to do with it. Before anyone could respond, the auditorium's main doors burst open. A squad of heavily armed Galactic Federation troops poured in, their weapons trained on Sarah. Sarah Chen, called the squad leader, a massive Gorlak in full combat armor. You are under arrest for violations of the Federation Non-Disclosure Treaty and concealment of military capabilities. Sarah didn't resist as they surrounded her. She looked up at Dean Varthul one last time. You wanted to know who I really am? She said. You're about to find out. As they led her away in restraints, the auditorium remained silent. Students and faculty watched the small human girl being escorted out by an entire squad of Federation troops, and for the first time many of them were wondering if they had seriously underestimated humanity. In her cell that night, Sarah lay on the hard metal bench and stared at the ceiling. Through the small window, she could see the lights of Galactic University in the distance. For 3 years, those lights had represented hope, a chance at a normal life, a future where she could be something other than a weapon. Now they just looked distant and cold. Her communicator, which they had somehow missed during the arrest, chimed softly. A message from Colonel Webb appeared on the screen. Sarah, I'm sorry. The situation has escalated beyond our control. The Federation Security Council is convening an emergency session about the human threat. They're demanding full disclosure of Earth's military capabilities. Sarah closed her eyes. I've been ordered to tell you that if they push too hard, if they threaten Earth's position in the Federation, you are authorized to reveal Operation Nightfall. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Operation Nightfall was the deepest classified program in Earth's history. It was the reason humanity had survived the Vorthon invasion. It was also something that would terrify the galactic community if they knew it existed. I hope it doesn't come to that, Webb's message continued. But if it does, you know what you have to do. Sarah deleted the message and lay back down. Tomorrow, she would face the Federation Security Council. They would demand answers about Earth's hidden military capabilities, about the war they had fought in secret, about how a weak species had defeated an advanced alien invasion force. And if they pushed her too far, if they threatened everything her people had sacrificed for, she would tell them. She would tell them about the night Earth died and was reborn as something far more dangerous than any alien species could imagine. She would tell them about Operation Nightfall, and then they would understand why the quiet girl in the back of the classroom had always been the most dangerous person in the room. The Federation Security Council chamber was a monument to galactic cooperation. Representatives from 47 species sat in tiered rows, their diverse forms creating a living testament to the unity that had brought peace to thousands of worlds. Today, that unity was focused on a single human girl. Sarah sat in the center of the chamber, alone at a small table under the scrutiny of beings whose species had ruled the stars for millennia. She wore simple clothes, the same jeans and university sweatshirt she'd been arrested in. but somehow managed to look completely composed, despite the weight of an entire galaxy's attention. Chancellor Mordun of the Kethran Empire called the session to order. His silver fur was marked with the scars of old battles, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "We are gathered today," his voice echoed through the chamber, "to address allegations that the species known as humanity has violated the non-disclosure treaty by concealing military capabilities and combat history during their admission to the Federation." Sarah remained perfectly still as he spoke. The accused, Sarah Elizabeth Chen, stands representative of her species in this matter. The charges are grave, and the implications far-reaching. Chancellor Mordun turned to face Sarah directly. "Miss Chen, before we begin formal proceedings, you have the right to legal representation from your species. Do you wish to exercise this right?" "No, Chancellor. I'll speak for myself." A murmur rippled through the chamber. It was unusual for any being to face the Security Council without legal counsel, especially in a case that could determine their species' fate in the Federation. "Very well. Agent Krixtal, please present your findings." The Villani investigator stood, his blue skin seeming to glow under the chamber's lights. "Honored Council, our investigation has uncovered evidence of systematic deception by the human government regarding their military history and capabilities." He activated a holographic display showing Earth floating in space. 3 years prior to humanity's first contact with the Federation, this planet was attacked by an advanced alien force. Our sources indicate this force had successfully conquered 12 other worlds using superior technology and tactics. The hologram shifted to show burn scars across Earth's surface. The attackers, whom humans call the Vorthans, achieved initial success, eliminating 30% of Earth's population in the first wave of attacks. Sarah watched the display without emotion, though her hands clenched slightly at the sight of her scarred homeworld. "However," Agent Krixtal continued, "within 6 months, the human resistance had not only halted the invasion, but completely eliminated the Vortan force. Not a single enemy survivor was found." The chamber erupted in whispers. Complete elimination of an advanced invasion force was virtually unheard of. Furthermore, the agent's voice cut through the noise. "Analysis of Vorthan technology recovered from the battlefields shows it to be significantly more advanced than current human military equipment. This raises the question of how such a decisive victory was achieved." Chancellor Mordun raised a hand for silence. "Miss Chen, how do you respond to these allegations?" Sarah stood slowly. "Which part would you like me to address, Chancellor?" "Let's start with the basic facts. Did Earth engage in military conflict with an alien species prior to joining the Federation?" "Yes." The simple, direct answer seemed to catch many council members off guard. "And was this conflict concealed during humanity's application for Federation membership?" "Yes." "Why?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Because we knew you would react exactly as you are reacting now." "And how is that?" "With fear." Chancellor Mordun's whiskers twitched. "Fear of what, Miss Chen?" "Fear of what we had to become to survive." Agent Krixtal stepped forward. "Miss Chen, our investigation suggests that humans possess military capabilities far beyond what your government has disclosed. We demand a full accounting of these capabilities." Sarah turned to face the agent. "You demand?" "The Security Council has the authority to investigate potential threats to galactic peace." "And you consider humanity a threat to galactic peace?" "The evidence suggests—" "The evidence," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "suggests that humans are very good at surviving." Representative Vexithera of the Zephyrian crystalline worlds rose from her seat. "Miss Chen, you're being evasive. This council requires specific information about human military capabilities and the nature of the conflict with these Vorthans." Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. 47 species, thousands of worlds, billions upon billions of lives, all united in their suspicion of humanity. "Very well," she said quietly. "You want to know about the war. I'll tell you about the war." She walked to the center of the chamber, turning slowly to address the entire assembly. "The Vorthons arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in school, complaining about a math test I hadn't studied for." Her voice was conversational, almost casual, but it carried perfectly through the silent chamber. "They didn't announce themselves. They didn't demand surrender. They simply began killing us." Sarah paused, her eyes distant. In the first hour, they destroyed every major military installation on Earth. In the first day, they had eliminated our governments, our command structures, our organized resistance. By the end of the first week, 3 billion people were dead. The chamber was completely silent. The Vorthons were efficient. They had done this before, on 12 other worlds. They knew exactly how to break a civilization quickly and completely. Sarah began walking slowly around the chamber as she spoke. But they made one mistake. They assumed that breaking our civilization would break us. She stopped in front of the Gorlak representative. "Your people understand war, Representative Thakmor. Your species conquered 30 worlds through superior strength and tactics. But tell me, what happens when strength and tactics aren't enough?" The massive Gorlak shifted uncomfortably. "You adapt." "Exactly. You adapt." Sarah continued her circuit of the chamber. "So we adapted. When our armies were destroyed, we became the army. When our weapons were taken, we made new ones. When our leaders were killed, we all became leaders." She stopped in front of Agent Krikstal. "You want to know how we defeated the Vorthons? We became something they had never encountered in 12 conquered worlds. Which was a species that refuses to die." Sarah returned to the center of the chamber. "The Vorthans had technology we couldn't match. They had weapons that could vaporize our cities. They had shields that could stop our most powerful attacks." "So how did you overcome them?" Chancellor Morden asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "We stopped fighting them like humans." "What does that mean?" "It means we embraced our worst instincts. We became predators. We learned to hunt." The chamber's atmosphere seemed to grow colder. "The Vorthons fought like a civilized species. They had rules, protocols, expectations. They conquered through superior firepower and intimidation." Sarah's voice grew harder. "But humans have spent 200,000 years as persistent predators. We're designed to chase our prey until it collapses from exhaustion. We're built to endure, to adapt, to survive no matter the cost." "Miss Chen," Representative Vexathera interrupted, "you're speaking in generalities. We need specific information about human military capabilities." Sarah looked directly at the Zephyrian representative. "Are you sure about that? The Council demands full disclosure." Sarah nodded slowly. "Very well. You want to know about Operation Nightfall?" Agent Krikstal straightened. This was the first time anyone had mentioned that name in an official capacity. Operation Nightfall was humanity's final solution to the Vorthon problem. Sarah activated her personal communicator and transmitted a data packet to the chamber's main display. "Authorization code Whiskey 77 Alpha, Colonel Marcus Webb, Earth Defense Force." The display showed a declassified military file marked with the highest security clearance. "When conventional warfare failed, we developed new methods. We studied Vorthon biology, psychology, technology. We learned everything about them." The display showed detailed anatomical charts of Vorthon physiology. "We discovered that their cybernetic implants, which made them superior warriors, had a weakness. They relied on quantum-encrypted communication networks to coordinate their actions." Sarah gestured, and the display changed to show complex technical schematics. "We developed a quantum virus, a piece of code that could infiltrate their neural networks through their own communication systems. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Quantum viral warfare was considered a theoretical impossibility by most galactic military experts. Miss Chen, Chancellor Morden's voice was strained. Are you saying that humans developed quantum-level biological warfare? I'm saying we developed whatever we needed to develop. Sarah touched her communicator again, and the display showed footage from the final battle of the Vorthon War. The virus didn't just disrupt their technology, it turned their own cybernetic enhancements against them. Every Vorthon on Earth died within 72 hours of deployment. The footage showed Vorthon warriors collapsing as their own technology tore them apart from the inside. But that's not the worst part, Sarah continued. Representative Kiksara of the Mollusk Confederation spoke for the first time. There's something worse than quantum biological warfare? Yes, we made sure the virus would spread. The chamber fell deadly silent. Every Vorthon ship that escaped Earth carried the virus back to their fleet. Every Vorthon base that received communications from those ships became infected. Sarah's voice was emotionless as she delivered the devastating truth. Within 1 year, the entire Vorthon species was extinct. The silence that followed was absolute. 47 species stared at the small human girl who had just admitted to genocide. Chancellor Morden was the first to find his voice. Miss Chen, are you telling this council that humanity committed xenocide? I'm telling you that humanity refused to become extinct. But the complete elimination of an entire species was their choice? Sarah interrupted. They came to our world to kill every human being alive. They succeeded in killing 3 billion of us before we stopped them. She walked closer to the Chancellor's podium. You want to judge us for what we did? Fine. But remember that everything we did to survive. Every weapon we built, every tactic we used, every line we crossed was to prevent the extinction of our species. Representative Velkaron of the Silicon Congress stood. Miss Chen, what you describe is the most horrific military action in galactic history. How can the Council trust a species capable of such brutality? Sarah turned to face the Silicon representative. Because we chose to stop. What do you mean? After the war ended, we had the most powerful weapon in galactic history. We could have used it to conquer every species we encountered. We could have become the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. Sarah gestured to herself. Instead, we buried the technology. We classified it so deeply that only a handful of people know it exists. We chose to join the galactic community as equals, not conquerors. But you still possess these capabilities, Agent Krikstal pointed out. Yes. And we always will. That's exactly what concerns this council. Sarah looked around the chamber at the fearful faces staring back at her. Let me ask you something. In the 12 worlds that the Vorthons conquered before Earth, how many species survived? Chancellor Morden consulted his files. None. Complete extinction in every case. And in the 3 years since humans joined the Federation, how many species have we attacked? How many worlds have we conquered? How many times have we used our military capabilities against our galactic neighbors? The Chancellor was quiet for a moment. None. That's right. 0. Despite having weapons that terrify you, despite having capabilities that exceed your understanding, humans have not initiated a single aggressive action since joining the Federation. Sarah returned to her table but remained standing. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our weapons. It's not our willingness to cross lines that other species won't cross. It's our choice. What choice? Chancellor Morden asked. The choice to be something other than what we were forced to become. Sarah looked directly at the Chancellor. Every species in this chamber has the capability for violence. Every civilization here has blood in their history. The difference is that most of you forgot what you're capable of when pressed to the absolute limit. And humans remember? Humans remember. And we choose, every day, to be better than our worst moments. The chamber remained silent as the council members absorbed her words. Chancellor Morden leaned forward. Miss Chen, this council must now decide whether humanity poses a threat to galactic peace. Your revelations today have been disturbing. I understand that. Do you have anything else to say before we deliberate? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, Chancellor, I do. She stood and faced the assembled representatives one final time. 3 years ago, I was Sergeant Sarah Chen, 15th Human Resistance Unit. I fought in the ruins of New York, London, and Tokyo. I saw things that would break most minds. I did things that would horrify most civilized beings. Her voice carried across the chamber with perfect clarity. When the war ended, I could have remained a soldier. Earth offered me any position I wanted in our military. I could have become a general, an admiral, a weapons researcher. What did you choose instead? Chancellor Morden asked. I chose to become a student. I chose to study xenobiology so I could understand the species that might one day be our friends. I chose to be invisible in the back of a classroom rather than feared on a battlefield. Sarah's eyes swept across the chamber. That choice, Chancellor, is what makes humans worthy of your trust. Not because we're incapable of terrible things. We've proven we're more capable than you ever imagined. But because we choose, despite that capability, to reach for something better. She paused. The question before this council isn't whether humans are dangerous. We are. The question is whether you trust us to remain civilized despite that danger. And if we don't, Representative Vexthara asked. Sarah met her gaze steadily. Then you'll have a choice to make. You can accept that humans are part of the galactic community with all the complexities that entails. Or you can decide that we're too dangerous to be your neighbors. And if we choose the latter, then you'll discover why the Vorthans aren't around to tell you how that choice worked out for them. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. It wasn't delivered with anger or aggression, but with the calm certainty of someone stating an undeniable fact. Chancellor Morden called for a recess while the council deliberated. 3 hours later, they returned. Sarah stood as Chancellor Morden approached the podium. Miss Chen, this council has reached a decision. She waited. The revelation of humanity's hidden military capabilities and the methods used in the Vorthan War are deeply troubling. Some members of this council believe that your species represents an unacceptable risk to galactic peace. Sarah's expression didn't change. However, the Chancellor continued, this council must also acknowledge that in 3 years of Federation membership, humans have demonstrated nothing but peaceful intentions and cooperative behavior. He paused. Furthermore, we must recognize that the actions taken during the Vorthan War, while extreme, were in response to an existential threat to your species. Chancellor Morden looked directly at Sarah. Therefore, this council finds that while humanity's methods were brutal, they were not unprovoked aggression. Humanity will retain its Federation membership, but with conditions. What conditions? First, Earth must provide a full inventory of its military capabilities to the Federation Security Council. Second, human military research must be subject to Federation oversight. Third, any humans serving in Federation military roles must undergo additional psychological evaluation. Sarah considered this for a moment. I'll need to communicate these terms to my government. That's acceptable. Miss Chen, I must ask, do you believe humanity will accept these conditions? Sarah looked around the chamber one last time. Chancellor, I believe humanity will do whatever is necessary to maintain peaceful relations with the galactic community. Even with such restrictions on your sovereignty? Especially with such restrictions. You see, The thing about humans is that we learn from our experiences. What do you mean? We learned that being alone in the universe is terrifying. We learned that having friends is better than having enemies. And we learned that sometimes the price of acceptance is worth paying. Sarah gathered her things. Besides, Chancellor, you're assuming those restrictions will actually limit us. Won't they? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. You're about to discover that humans are very good at following the letter of the law while finding creative interpretations of its spirit. As she walked toward the exit, Chancellor Mordun called after her. Miss Chen, one final question. She turned. Are there others like you? Other humans with combat experience attending Federation institutions? Sarah's smile widened slightly. Chancellor, we're the species that refused to die when the most advanced military force in known galactic history tried to exterminate us. Did you really think you'd only encounter one of us in your universities? With that, she left the chamber, leaving behind a council that was beginning to realize they might have seriously underestimated just how many invisible students were sitting in the back rows of classrooms across the galaxy. 6 months later, Sarah Chen walked across the stage at Galactic University to receive her degree in xenobiology. The auditorium was packed, and when her name was called, the applause was thunderous. She was no longer invisible. Everyone knew who she was now, what she represented, what her species was capable of. But as she accepted her diploma and looked out at the crowd of diverse alien faces, she realized something important. She was still the same person who had chosen to study the biology of species that might one day be friends rather than threats. She was still someone who reached for knowledge instead of weapons. The war had made her dangerous, but peace had made her human again. And that, she thought as she walked off the stage, was what would keep the galaxy safe from both humanity's darkest capabilities and their own fears. After all, the most dangerous human was one who chose not to be dangerous at all.